name is Alan Goldberg. I'm the president of the American College of Chest Physicians and a trustee of the Chest Foundation. I'm also a physician who is a staunch believer in building a partnership between healthcare professionals and patients. I've enthusiastically endorsed that maxim throughout my career. You're about to witness and hear a true story told by Audrey King, who is a good friend who just lived her personal adventure. You will learn, as I have over the years, the value of the patient's perspective. As a pediatric critical care physician, my first assignment after fellowship training was to find a regional solution for children who required prolonged mechanical ventilation. At the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, one of the world's pioneering pediatric ICUs, advances in pediatric critical care medicine, surgery, and anesthesia have resulted in a small but growing population of survivors who depended upon long-term mechanical ventilation and had no place to go. Home care for technology-dependent children developed as one option for these children with special needs and their families. However, more comprehensive regional solutions were required. In my search for the answers, I looked to the past global experience with the world's first ventilator-dependent patients, those who survived polio. The poliomyelitis experience was the foundation for modern mechanical ventilation, artificial airway management by tracheostomy, and modern critical care. However, some post-polio survivors with chronic respiratory insufficiency, their physicians, and other concerned healthcare professionals and organizational leaders also developed, around the world, the first experiences with home mechanical ventilation as an opportunity to provide these individuals a better life in their communities. In 1981, the International Year for Disabled Persons, an historic gathering of world leaders including physicians, ventilator users, and internationally respected giants of the public, private, and voluntary sectors met to review the past, describe the present, and plan for the future by evaluating whatever happened to the polio patient. It was there that I first met Audrey King, who was a presenter, and Margaret Farmer, a meeting planner and presenter. It was there that they and my mentors, Dr. C. Everett Koop, Jimmy Laurie, and Dr. Augusta Alba, demonstrated the value of listening to patients, to learn their real needs, and to work with them as partners in finding treatment solutions. Audrey King has been a faithful friend and role model for persons with disability who want to maintain their independence by managing their medical care through self-education, advocacy, and direct dialogue with healthcare professionals. Having contracted polio in 1952 during her childhood, Audrey became determined during her hospital stays to remain in control of her care, to ensure that her goals in life were achieved. Audrey is now a retired psychologist with years of dedicated service at the Hugh McMillan Rehabilitation Center in Toronto, Canada. Her decades of personal experience with non-invasive ventilation, her accomplishments as an advocate for independence of persons with disability, and our partnership promoting public policy for ventilator users in Ontario made me certain that she would be an outstanding Meet the Professor at CHEST 1998, ACCP's annual scientific assembly in Toronto. And indeed she was. Audrey was also invited to participate in person at the 1999 Orlando Conference on Non-Invasive Mechanical Ventilation, but her life situation changed all that. Audrey is one of 4 persons I know who had the same problem. They acquired acute pneumonia, which was life-threatening. They required a tracheostomy for the first time, but only Audrey survived. Audrey experienced what many other persons with chronic respiratory insufficiency have learned. From time to time, life's adventures can provide challenges for new personal growth, and that we as physicians, together with our patients, can all learn from each other from these opportunities. Audrey King produced the following presentation while at the hospital after recovery from acute respiratory failure requiring her tracheostomy. This presentation is powerful. I hope you will enjoy it as I have. It will reveal very vital messages that will help all physicians to understand patients who require long-term mechanical ventilation and how we can better serve them as care partners under changing circumstances.
Whenever I do a presentation, I like to research my topic well, but I never ever thought that last summer when I agreed to participate in the topic Bridging the Gap from the ICU to Home Care, that fate would ironically make my research a reality. 3.5 months ago, a bout with pneumonia landed me in the ICU, where attempts were made to manage the illness with my usual mode of ventilation, PLV 100, with a face mask. The inexsulfator was also tried, and there were several attempts at intubation before finally my respirologist reluctantly made the decision to do a tracheostomy. This is a mode of ventilation that's completely foreign to me, and one which my respirologist reluctantly took, knowing me to be a long-standing advocate of non-invasive ventilation. At the moment, I'm somewhere between ICU and home care. This is also an experience that's new to me, because when I had polio as a child in 1952, there was no specialized high-tech ICU. There was no home care. It simply meant coming home to my family after 2 years of hospitalization, and my family on their own took care of my increased physical needs, yet held the same expectations for independence, self-reliance, and achievement. Initially, following polio, I was in an iron lung for 6 weeks, and this was then followed by 5 ventilation-free years, following which I then used nocturnal ventilation via a cuirass. As an adolescent, I hated this deadly, embarrassing secret. I always wondered if I really, really needed this piece of equipment. And in my mid-20s, following completion of my university studies, I came to Toronto to take up employment as well as to get an answer to my question. But somehow, in my quest, I got redirected to orthopedics, who stabilized my spine. Respirology got somehow left behind, and immediately following surgery, I was told that I had never really needed the cuirass, that I'd just been psychologically dependent. As you might expect, I was mortified, I was very embarrassed, but yet at the same time, I was thrilled to be rid of this monstrosity. Within a few weeks, bad morning headaches began to happen. I didn't know the significance of them at that time, and they weren't taken seriously. I went back to work. I relished my newfound freedom. I got on with my career at a major Toronto Children's Rehabilitation Center, and I traveled a lot. But symptoms of respiratory insufficiency were increasing. I had morning headaches. I was waking up at night trying to get back the rhythm of breathing. I was falling asleep in the day at work, and it was getting pretty bizarre. I was falling asleep on the telephone and even in the shopping center. But I didn't recognize these symptoms as significant, and my family doctor didn't seem to be at all worried. Finally, it was nighttime urinary frequency, which finally led me to a urologist, then to a physiatrist, and then to a respirologist who gave me absolute hell for thinking that I could have managed on my own without nighttime ventilation. Again, I was mortified. Blame the victim. I had always assumed that doctors knew best, but it was at this point that I realized that my very survival depended on me learning as much as possible about respiratory insufficiency, that I had to become sure of myself and determined and not sensitive to blame. I came home once again with a cuirass, which didn't fit. It caused sores and leaks. It was an absolute nightmare, and I was in this problem all by myself. There was no home care. There was no maintenance plan. I didn't realize such equipment needed maintenance, and it was on a holiday weekend in Michigan when it broke down. Fortunately, at that time, technology was simple, and a neighbor who fixed vacuum cleaners was able to replace worn brushes and got it going. The problems with the cuirass were so unsolvable and so relentless that I felt like the very last polio respiratory person in the world. Yet, common sense told me otherwise. I began searching, writing letters, making phone calls, and eventually I discovered a large group of polio survivors in Edmonton where there was a well-established respiratory home care service. I also discovered the Rehabilitation Gazette and notice of a 1981 conference in Chicago on respiratory rehabilitation and independent living. I simply had to go. For me, that was a watershed event. It was a turning point which empowered me with enough knowledge to set my course. It was a powerful meeting of knowledgeable physicians, healthcare providers, and ventilator users working and presenting together in a relationship of mutual learning and respect. At that conference, I learned how to frog breathe. I learned about customized gadgets and devices. I learned about positive pressure via mouthpiece or mask, and I came back convinced that this was the solution to my problems. And so it was, enabling me finally to put my concerns to rest and to get on with my career and become involved in advocacy issues involving the long-term needs of ventilator users in Ontario. But back to the present. I don't really recall much of the several weeks that I spent in the ICU, except for a terrifying disability-related psychosis, which had me absolutely convinced that I must not go to sleep because my disability meant that I was of lesser priority in terms of saving my life in today's severely restricted healthcare environment. I was sure that if I went to sleep, they would turn off the monitors. Curiously, the only highlight and relief during this ongoing nightmare was the hallucinatory midnight arrival of Alan Goldberg, Dr. Alba, and Darlene Stelders, an RT friend from Edmonton, all three of them dating back to the early 1981 Ginny conference. In my psychosis, I imagined that they had come to rescue me in the middle of the night, and the relief was enormous. When you're in a hospital, in the ICU or on a ward, it is terrifying to be helpless and feel that you have no control. I think this is even more true for people with disabilities. Positioning so as to maintain some function and be comfortable is absolutely crucial. But it's hard and often impossible to communicate this in an ICU where you are too sick. But apparently, I made heroic efforts to carry on self-directing my care, even when I was unable to speak, by gesturing to be sat up on the bed or put in my chair. The staff, in their sincere efforts to be patient-centered or patient-focused, listened. I can be quite convincing, until I simply fell over, being neither rational nor reasonable at this point, after which they called the shots, which was appropriate. After several weeks, the move from critical care to a medical ward was a nightmare. Although I was in an observation room near the nursing station, the nurse-patient ratio was about 1:8. There was no understanding yet of my disability needs. I could neither move myself nor lie in one position for more than an hour. I was too weak to call for help or to communicate. Fortunately, friends and colleagues came to the rescue, staying overnight for several weeks and coming through the day to help me with meals, to provide actual frontline care, even though many of them had never even assisted me before, and to help the staff become aware of my unique disability needs. As I became stronger, my articulate, convincing, self-directed nature began to return. I insisted on getting up and dressed every day, even though this was extremely exhausting. I can function better in my wheelchair. But this is not behavior that's expected of ventilator-dependent patients who are still quite ill. A lot of suctioning was still required, but I was absolutely convinced that if I got home, I would become better quicker. The respiratory therapy and nursing staff were concerned because at this point my chest was a wheezy mess, suctioning was difficult, there seemed to be a block, but after all, I knew about the PLV 100, and my attendants were willing to learn tracheostomy care and suctioning. Also, hospital beds are costly and scarce. Being articulate, questioning, knowledgeable, and self-directing can be a problem. It can put you in situations of jeopardy when you're ill and involved in unfamiliar territory. Questioning and conversation which makes your knowledge of ventilators obvious, it can be intimidating to staff. It can lead to the assumption that you're better than you really are. It's hard for staff to understand that independence makes you ask for help as little as possible and reluctant to bring a problem to staff attention. But disability isn't the same as illness. I did get to go home fairly early on. The deal was there had to be 24-hour support. This was worked out surprisingly quickly with a combination of 30 hours of home care RN per week, an insurance-paid RN overnight, and my usual 3 attendants. Prior to getting sick, I have had 6 hours of government-funded, self-managed attendant services since a direct funding program became established several years ago. Through some negotiation, this was increased to 9 hours a day for a 10-week period. It was great to be home. Absolutely fabulous at first. But as I looked around and saw that my bedroom and bathroom had been transformed from a home to a hospital, it wasn't nice at all. The overnight RN wanted to socialize. I wanted to sleep. The home care RN was an organizer, a tidy freak. She wouldn't sit still, and she seized every opportunity to organize my bathroom cupboards and drawers. Of course, putting things that I regularly use out of my reach so as to have her supplies close. A small part of me appreciated this housekeeping, but a bigger part of me didn't. But I simply didn't have the energy to protest or get involved or explain the importance of having things put where I could reach them. She was an excellent nurse, I guess, but she didn't understand how important my independence was to me, or how to find the balance between nursing care and letting me be in charge of what I could. My attendants, one of whom I've had for 10 years, were generally excellent. They were comfortable with their role and added functions. But the problem is, territory quickly developed. The RNs had little respect for the attendants. They didn't hesitate to say so and involve me in it. Home care involved 5 people around the clock with a schedule that I had to coordinate. There was serious lack of privacy. My geriatric cat was vomiting all over the carpet. My mom, who's 87 and totally deaf, whose relief at having me home necessitated my immediate re-involvement in supporting her communication and daily living needs. On top of this, it was getting more difficult to suction me. I had bronchospasm, and it was all a bit much. Finally, after 10 days, a long period of difficulty breathing and necessitated a return to emergency where an obstructing granuloma was discovered, and I had to be readmitted. The ENT folk at the hospital couldn't do the laser surgery required. This involved transportation to a downtown hospital where the thoracic surgeon who removed the granulomas also discovered erosion of the posterior tracheal wall. He replaced the number 6 Shiley, which had caused the problem, with a soft sponge cuffed bivona tube, effectively silencing me and making it extremely difficult for me to talk for about 2 weeks. I hadn't expected this, and it was rather difficult to deal with this setback at the time. But his news was great. He felt I could return to my previous mode of function, the PLV with the mask and the mouthpiece, after he'd removed the bivona and replaced it with a Montgomery T-tube. Fabulous news, I thought. This is the best I've heard yet. Except the respirologists and the RTs at my hospital had never heard of such a tube. The ENT folk at my hospital felt that it was not appropriate for use with a ventilator. It was too soft, it didn't have a connection, it could be pulled out by the weight of the tracheostomy tubing, even folding on itself and suffocating you, and it would need to be replaced under anesthetic. Who was right, I wondered. Now, I've just learned from the ENT via my respirologist that my trachea is small and the number 6 Shiley totally fills it. So I asked myself, why did the ICU staff place a number 8 tube and leave it there for several weeks? Better not go there. The ENT have discovered that the erosion has still not healed. So they have now put in a number 4 Shiley, which is quite small and doesn't butt against the side of the tracheas. Amazingly, the need for suctioning has totally disappeared. There's lots of space. I don't need the Passimir valve to talk. And simply corking it enables me to spend more and more time off the ventilator. So I feel like I'm making progress. But last night, when using the ventilator, the high pressure alarm kept going off, keeping me awake and driving the staff crazy. I start to worry again. Is the number 4 becoming positional and digging in the side of the trachea? Or is the alarm going off because I need to stretch and stack my breaths? I asked the respiratory therapist to make the high pressure alarm less sensitive. They can't, or they won't. If only I was at home and had the ventilator beside me, I would fool around with the knobs myself. I do this all the time. I feel like a pawn. I feel like I'm caught between different specialties and services. Respirology, ENT, thoracic surgery, and 2 different hospitals. You can see that the tracheostomy tube has been replaced by a cork. This means that I'm not using the ventilator and I can breathe more and more on my own every day. I'm now feeling like I'm too well to be here. I feel guilty about taking up a bed. After all, this is a busy acute care hospital. I could make noises about getting out of here, but I'm a little bit worried about out of sight, out of mind. I learned that this can happen during those 10 days I was at home. I also need to get more support coordinated than just 6 hours a day. And that whole business is going to have to happen all over again. I'm feeling like I've been stuck between the ICU and home for far too long. It's time to get on with my life. I've been fortunate to have a physician who, from the very beginning, has consistently informed me of the issues, respected my intelligence, and educated me, with the expectation that he will ultimately do what I wish regarding removing or keeping the tracheostomy and setting me up again with whatever mode of ventilation I choose. This is great, but sometimes I really wish that he knew more about post-polio options, and sometimes I would like him to steer the ship for me and tell me more what to do. Sometimes I find myself saying, "You're the doctor, I'm the patient." From the very beginning, my intentions to return to my previous mode of ventilation have been strong. But as time goes by, and with the number 4 Shiley tube in place, I find that I can now speak fairly easily. And there's absolutely no secretions. It's easy to breathe around the cork, and as I said, my time breathing on my own is increasing. As time goes by, I can better see the relative advantages and disadvantages of the mask, the mouthpiece, and a tracheostomy. I haven't yet decided what I'm going to do, but the fact that I've had pneumonia twice during the last 2 years gives me serious food for thought about whether or not I should keep the stoma open. Soon, I know I'll be going home. But as I said, I'm going to need more assistance than just 6 hours a day. The fact that I can breathe more on my own and that I don't need suctioning is going to mean that getting support in the house will be less than during those 10 days that I was at home, and it will have to be renegotiated. I may have to think about moving or having somebody live in. I'm just not sure at this point. Finding and keeping the balance between independence and dependence on those whose medical expertise you trust and value in unfamiliar situations, such as severe illness, can be tricky indeed when your disability is unique and unfamiliar. As Hippocrates once said, it's better to know the person who has the disease than it is to know the disease that the patient has. The uniqueness of long-term disability, such as polio or other neuromuscular conditions, as well as the coping style of the person, needs to be considered in making that transition from the ICU to home.
Right now I'm in Toronto. I'm visiting Audrey where I have been before in her home. Several years ago, in fact, we used to work together here in Toronto with the Ministry of Health on some of the public policy issues with long-term mechanical ventilation. Audrey, I bet you wonder why I've come up to see you after not having seen you for quite a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled that you have, but yeah.
Well, as you know, I was very disappointed after inviting you to the meeting because it was important to me that you would come and provide the patient perspective at our opening session.
Tell me more about it. It really bugged me that I couldn't be there, so I'd really like to hear.
First, I took the tape with Barry Make, who was responsible for the meeting, back to my hotel room to look at it with him. For about 20 minutes or so, we just were spellbound. We didn't say a word. And when it was over, Barry looked to me and he said, "Keynote." He said, "This is the keynote address. We're going to change the whole opening session and feature the tape."
Wow.
And then we used the tape. What an impact it made. Imagine a room where 500 or more people, their eyes glued to the screen. They're looking at this tape, sitting next to each other, are doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists, physical therapists. They're ventilator users and some of their personal attendants and family members. No one realizes what each other has as their major role, but they all know they're experts, all watching you telling the story. That's why we decided to make this tape. We think the message is so important. It's so important for physicians and other health professionals to understand and begin to value the partnership that you and I have shared almost now going on to 30 years. This partnership in doing things together and making a difference in what we do.
So was it like that first meeting in 1981 where we met?
You remember that experience?
Well, when I first went there, went into the hotel, saw all these other people who looked like me, who moved like me, I thought, I'm not so sure I want to be here. This is a mistake. And then when I saw people literally plugged into the wall breathing, then I really thought, I don't want to be here. But within a few hours, and certainly within a day, it was the most incredible meeting I've ever been at. It felt like a meeting of war veterans. Even though none of us really knew each other, we'd all kind of been in the same battle many years ago and in the struggles since, in terms of achieving independence and living our own lives and getting the needs that we have met. And the other thing that was truly amazing was the relationship between people who provided health care and people who were the consumers in health care. It was like absolutely lateral relationship. There was none of this feeling of hierarchy where the healthcare providers were up here and the consumers in healthcare were down here. It was like totally mutual learning. It was like so powerful. Because what people who live with the problems bring to that whole sort of knowledge that you need is an awareness about life, about the day-to-day issues, about the fact that it isn't as simple as just dealing with a breathing issue. It isn't as simple as lungs. It's about living in its broadest sense. And that's what healthcare providers don't usually have an opportunity to see or to realize. Because usually when they interact with people who use ventilators, it's usually when people are very ill or they're in acute situations. So they never really have a chance to see how great life is, how independent people can be, how they can achieve the same goals as everyone else.
Audrey, I'm kind of curious. It's been a couple of months since you made the original video. You've been home now and you've had a chance to have some real advancement, thank goodness, in your health. I'm wondering how you feel now, and compared to the way you did when you made the video, about some of the experiences that you've had recently, from the point of view of how you feel about directing your own care and how physicians and other healthcare professionals respond to you.
Well, they said it was unusual. They said that most people who have tracheostomies don't worry about the color of the cork and the cosmetics and the weight of things and the awkwardness and how it's going to restrict your mobility. They said most people with tracheostomies don't go out. So I think certainly they got to know me and who I am, and I got to know them. And I developed greater respect for the constraints they're under. And I think although I stayed longer than I would have liked to, I think there was learning going on, from their point of view, from my point of view.
Well, I certainly know that I've felt that I've always learned from the children and the parents of the ventilator users that I've dealt with as a pediatrician. I would hope that generation of persons with polio like yourself who solved the problem of going home could help with this dilemma. We were having these little children staying for years, literally, in the hospital. They had nothing to do. They would have for entertainment occasionally a cardiopulmonary arrest when everyone would come into the unit and they'd see all this activity and they would start clapping, figuring that everyone came to see them. It was a dreadful experience.
So a really deprived existence.
A terribly deprived existence. I remember one little boy, he was calling his mom one night from the ICU, and he asked his mom, "Mom, where are you calling me from?" And she said, "Well, I'm calling you from the kitchen. I'm sitting at the kitchen table." Several hours later, he asked the nurse, "Would you come over here for a minute? I have a question. What's a kitchen table?" That's how you realize just how deprived the kids were. They were literally tethered to their ventilators by long cords. They weren't able to go home. And then we were able to develop at least some discharge planning and able to bring the kids home. They'd have the same experience as other kids. One youngster would go home, he'd go to a birthday party, climb a tree, fall out of a tree like anybody else, and he'd have a broken arm.
Wow, that's neat.
And he would go to school and he would be able to have an education, although some of it had to be tutored at home. But he'd start to have the kind of social interaction through telecommunication and through visiting with his friends after school that made it possible for him to start to have some of the social development he needed. He was able to play, and the play became his therapy. And it made it possible for him actually one day to actually win an award where he was using one of these carts where you use your hands, and he had the motivation to be a go-kart racer. And that in itself was his physical therapy. I mean, we're in the hospital, we're thinking about what to do with these kids. Give them the chance to be home with their friends.
Yeah.
They will have the social development, they will have the physical development that they never would have had.
Well, I think that's the key to making progress. You got to do it together. It's the absolute key.
Audrey, I want to thank you again for first making the tape and providing that for us in Orlando. And the attendees were able to get the basic principles that I think we both share, the idea of a partnership between patients and their providers of health care, the idea of the essential trust that has to be developed in a long-term relationship so that they can work together in the partnership and share their perspectives. It's so important to have the patient's perspective when you're dealing with long-term mechanical ventilation. But I think in our discussion today we've brought out some of these points and the need for the time that it takes for the development of this trust, and how you change as a person, and that a person at one time may be a very strong advocate for wanting to be respected totally as an independent, self-directed care provider for themselves. Another time, an acute illness comes, and during that illness, there's more of a need for being directed by the healthcare professional. Idea that I can be dependent for a while because I don't know all the information that I need. I think these are very, very important principles that you've shared with me, and hopefully the people who enjoy this tape will be able to understand this and manage their patients with need of long-term mechanical ventilation with a great deal more sensitivity and make them much more effective as care partners. Founded in 1935, the American College of Chest Physicians aspires to be the leading resource for the improvement in cardiopulmonary and critical care worldwide. Our mission is to promote the prevention and treatment of diseases of the chest through leadership, education, research, and communications. Audrey King's testimonial is an essential part of how the ACCP reaches out to our 15,000 members, their patients, and the public. The videotape From the ICU to Homecare, A Patient's Perspective, is the second in a series to be offered with support from the Chest Foundation. Funded in 1996 as the philanthropic arm of the American College of Chest Physicians, the Chest Foundation seeks to provide resources to advance the prevention and treatment of diseases of the chest. Through the creation of new programs, funding of research, awards, and honor lectures, and promoting awareness of advances in chest medicine, the Chest Foundation imparts its mission. The proceeds from the sale of this videotape will be used to support the newly created Margaret Farmer Memorial Fund on long-term mechanical ventilation. As the Director of Pediatric Home Health for Loyola University Health Systems in Chicago, I can attest that home care has been more than a lifelong vocation. The relationships that I have developed have broadened and enriched my life. I have derived a greater medical understanding by having witnessed the perseverance, dedication, and wisdom from the patients who have become my friends and care partners. Such is my relationship with Audrey King. Such was my friendship with Margaret Farmer. Margaret Farmer was a lifelong leader and nationally recognized advocate for persons with disabilities. Despite the severe, debilitating effects from polio that she contracted as a college student in 1956, that left her a complete, total quadriplegic and dependent upon mechanical ventilation, she provided a positive example for others who wanted to live independently with dignity. Her achievements range from the design and creation of new adaptive communication and life-sustaining technologies, and advances in rehabilitation engineering, to advocacy in the U.S. Congress and the White House through more than 4 administrations, that changed public policy concerning better use of Social Security disability payments to allow people to work. She was a trusted advisor to state and national agencies, including the National Institute for Health, where she spoke to the need for consumer-focused research. She was an enabler whose influence was felt by many and will continue to resonate in the future by others as a result of her reach into the worlds of technology, politics, social science, and medicine. Margaret Farmer also touched the ACCP. As a prolific writer, she was a longtime user of non-invasive mechanical ventilation and was a contributor to a 1991 article in our scientific journal, Chest, entitled Nocturnal Ventilatory Support of a Disabled Person at Home. It is therefore fitting that the proceeds from the sale of Audrey King's inspirational story that you just heard will be used to support the work that Margaret Farmer valued throughout her life. Her fund will allow users of long-term mechanical ventilation to attend and participate at ACCP educational activities, as well as present an honor lecture in her name at the annual CHEST meeting. To support the ACCP through the CHEST Foundation, please call 847-498-8370 or email us at chestfoundation@chestnet.org. Working together, we can make a difference.